students of Reddit, what's the weirdest thing a teacher has ever done in class? Had this substitute all the time in high school. He would bring this licorice candy that resembled chalk and placed it on the blackboard ledge without anyone noticing. Start introducing himself and say he's weird cause he likes eating chalk. Proceeding to pick up the candy chalk and eating it. When everyone looks at him like WTF, he revealed it was candy. Super weird guy, but I guess that's an interesting way to be remembered. Imagine if he accidentally picked the real chalk. I had a history teacher who had been through a lot of action in Vietnam. He was showing us the PBS series on the American Civil War, and during a scene with lots of battlefield noises, men screaming, cannons, and gunfire, he had a PTSD flashback. He started screaming for us to get down, so we all got down under our desks. After a few minutes he came to and told us he was joking, that we all did well. He left the room and didn't come back that class period. He was a great guy. I think he handled it well afterwards, TBH. My 5th grade math teacher had a pet chalk he called Wanda. He was a goofy fellow and would say things like watch Wanda at the numerators. One day he had forgotten the chalk in his pocket and it had broken. When he went to take Wanda out to do a lesson, there were a bunch of chalk pieces in his hand. He excitedly announced Wanda had babies. Honestly, based on the one above, I was expecting the teacher to start crying. Had a science teacher in middle school that once changed his shirt 14 times in one class period, all to teach us a lesson about being observant. High school biology teacher showed us a video of a woman giving birth. After the video ended, she accidentally pressed rewind without stopping the video first. Good old VCR days, making us watch the whole thing in reverse. Imagine a man grabbing a baby by its head and sticking it back in. I am having a terrible week and this just made me laugh so hard. Thank you. Be kind. Rewind. Had a professor that I had been told once ate chalk, so I asked him about it. Grabs a piece of chalk, pops it in his mouth, eats it and says it's really not that different from Tums. Same guy once stopped lecturing, knocked on the whiteboard, walked to the edge, put his face against the wall as if to look behind it, stated I could hide my treasure back here and then continued lecturing as if nothing happened. Head of year walked into class, randomly tipped his mug upside down, poured coffee over his feet, stared at it in silence for a while and then just left, without saying a word. What a power move. When I was a teacher in college, I noticed I'd been assigned to a 4th floor room with a really wide ledge below it that was hard to see. So on the first day of class, I arrived half an hour early when the room was empty, climbed out the window onto the ledge, then waited with the book until I was 10 minutes late, and then climbed in the 4th floor window to introduce myself. It made the impression I hoped. That is the best thing in this thread. My teacher noticed that only girls asked questions and engaged in class, and he reckoned it was because he was a male so they were attracted to him. Hoping that the guys would ask more questions, he wore a dress for an entire day. Freshman year, linguistics. Professor was an overweight Russian guy with a heavy accent, prob in his mid-late 30s. Had a habit of sitting on the desk in the front of the room while lecturing. One day, class begins and I notice his flies open and it seems he's going commando BC, there def a fleshy patch visible. I'm looking around the room and see many others who seem to have noticed, but no one wants to embarrass the guy since we barely know him and it's only a couple weeks into the semester. As he walks back and forth lecturing, his nutsack is slowly making itself visible, like someone slowly blowing a bubble with bubble gum. Front row is mostly girls and I can see they are a mixture of horrified and barely controlled laughter. Still no one can bring themselves to say a word about it. Finally he makes his move. He's boosts himself onto the front desk, plops down, and the back pressure created by his mass makes his balls burst forth from his unzipped fly into the open air like a breaching whale. He doesn't notice, or at least acts as though he doesn't notice. He continues the rest of the lecture as if nothing is amiss. I cannot fathom how he had no reaction or awareness that his balls are on display at seated face level about 8 feet from the front row of students. Class ends and everyone bolts out of the room with mixed looks of disgust, mirth, and shock. Would have loved to have seen the professor's reaction when he later finally realized he was hanging crumpet for some unknown amount of time. He was hanging crumpet. Thank you yet again Reddit, for expanding my vocabulary. I once watched a teacher of mine have a mental breakdown, triggered by a student correcting her on a page number, cursing, spitting, calling young girls W, etc. Was quite the show for 8-year-old me. My school had something similar to that happen when I was in kindergarten, except our teacher called the girl with Down syndrome a dirty pig. He was having trouble with his dog, a boxer, if I recall correctly, getting into stuff at home while he and his wife were away at work. The solution to this was to set up a video call with speakers and video in the rooms where the dog was and chastise the dog over video on the projector in front of the whole class. The dog didn't listen at all, which made it even better. This is really funny lol. I taught an entire class with an open fly. Now I have to obsessively check half a dozen times before going into a class. I had an econ professor pretend to smoke a pipe. He had a real pipe and talk in a really bad British accent as part of some incoherent metaphor he was trying to make. High school science teacher showed us an old video about the dangers of electricity. Featured a girl trying to hit a shuttlecock out of a tree, hitting an overhead wire with a racket, and falling to the ground screaming. He rewound and replayed the scene at least 20 times while laughing and grunting. Not sure about weird, but I had a college professor who played World of Warcraft during class some days. Apparently the people he played with were from Australia, so the times they played were mornings in the US. The rank 14 grind never stops, my man. My teacher, after AP exams and during the time in which we do jack shit because there's no more to learn, started playing Overcooked with us, and he's just shouting, "I've got the rice. What do I do with the rice? Sushi round." To be completely honest, we didn't think he'd actually join in, but it was pretty funny. We played Hearts of Iron 4 after our exams, and this teacher annexed everyone a full Soviet Union. I was taking a Bulls film history class for a gen ed at the local community college before I transferred to a 4-year, and the teacher was this weird guy who was in his late 60s, had dreadlocks, and was really into health fitness and liked to talk about weird crap all the time, like how he bet he could outrun the 20-year-old men in the class in a race. One day in the middle of a lecture, completely out of the blue, he points to a girl in the middle of the class who looked 18 or 19 and asked who has a reason for why I shouldn't be in a relationship with her. The first person says because he's her teacher. So he says okay, but what if I weren't her teacher? Then somebody says he's significantly older than her, and he says he's really healthy and plans to live past 100. After an uncomfortable amount of time, somebody finally says there is no reason they shouldn't be together, and he says that's right, and we continued with the lesson like it had never happened. It wasn't relevant to anything. I understand that she didn't raise her hand and say because I don't want to, but I really wish she had lol. One of my English professors had a giant misshapen head with wisps of black hair in odd places that he never combed. His glasses never fit straight, and he preferred teaching in his sock feet. Just weird. That said, he invited the whole class over to his home at the end of the semester for a potluck lunch. The few of us who showed up had a surprisingly fun time. He shared his vinyl collection of classical music with us and told some great stories. I guess it's as sad as it is weird, but I vividly recall one of my teachers, who was usually quite strict when it came to most things and was actually a really good teacher. Coming into class one day, she was late for the first time ever, sat at her desk and began crying over a breakup. She didn't address anyone, she just sat there and cried. Like I said, she was always a bit strict, so we all just kind of sat there for the remainder of the class and somehow managed to make small groups and began practicing for an upcoming quiz. It was a language class, in order to give her some space. Nobody ever mentioned it to anyone in admin, from what I can tell, and as she came in the next class, sincerely apologized, and also commemorated us for making our one study groups, instead of sitting there awkwardly. She was a great teacher, a really nice person, and, with the exception of that time, always professional, so although we found it to be weird, I guess, we just gave her a pass and moved on from there. Anyone is capable of having such a low point. With all of that being said, I have taught before, albeit at university level, and I still think it was unprofessional and weird, but I don't know. I suspect that it may have been difficult to have quickly found a substitute. I studied zoology and one of our teachers was fantastic. The first lecture we had with him, we walked into the room to find him lying on the floor wearing a shirt that matched the blue color of the carpet shouting, "You can't see me because I'm using camouflage as a defense mechanism." Other memorable moments include throwing about £1 in pennies on the floor one at a time to demonstrate asexual reproduction, demonstrating selfish herd theory by pretending to be a predator attacking students sitting on the outside seats and requesting they dramatically fall down when attacked, the number of times he pretended to be a dinosaur. Absolutely wonderful teacher, and I hope he never changes. Jesus, he sounds wonderful. My stats teacher was holding a mug of coffee and pretending to drink out of it for about half an hour. He then set it down on his desk under the classroom projector, and there was a giant dead roach in it. The class freaked out, and he seemed pretty amused by our reaction. Teacher trolling at its best. My physics teacher once just wrote in a notepad on the projector, writing that he has a sore throat so he will just do it like this today. One of our teachers got a girl to lay flat on her back on a desk and jiggle her boobs as an example of what happens when a volcano erupts. It was time for Thomas to leave. He had seen everything. Had a couple of weird teachers. One punched a hole in the wall because people weren't paying attention. He also punched out a window because too many people failed a test. Was a really nice guy and we were in a temporary building, but that was just weird. Had another teacher that was striving to get our attention. One day he promised to teach a full hour upside down if we were quiet for that one lesson. We were actually quiet since we all wanted to know if he would actually do it. And the next class, he walked up to the blackboard, put his hands on the floor, kicked his legs up against the blackboard and was teaching like that. He was pretty red at the end. Had another teacher that was a bit on the wild side. If a pretty woman walked past the building outside, he would jump on the windowsill and start pounding the window like a gorilla. He also had a sacrificial dish that would get thrown to you if you weren't quiet 5 minutes after class started. But the best part was, since he was a chemistry teacher, we made him promise to show us how to make a stink bomb by the end of the year if we were a good class. So we were a good class for a whole year. At the end of the year we reminded him of his promise. He said he remembered. He got some chemicals from the locker, switched on his Bunsen burner and proceeded to mix the chemicals, explaining what he was doing and why, the chemistry involved and stuff. He then put it on the burner, casually walked out of the class, and locked the door, while we were all in horror watching this yellow smoke coming up from the teacher's desk. He was laughing maniacally at our attempts to lessen the smell. He even got our economy teacher out to laugh with him. Great prank. My teacher at elementary school had one child in every class charged with changing her shoes every morning, since she had some painful wart on her feet. I can only imagine how humiliating it must have been for them, on their knees in front of the class, handling smelly teacher feet. Of course she wasn't mentally stable. She used to beat the students and it was common to not go to school on Saturdays since we had 4 hours with her. History teacher of mine wanted to be cool with us, the student. He made a joke about one of my friend's mom. My friend responded, "Your mother," and was promptly kicked out of class. My friend never got in trouble because he explained the situation to the main office and we all backed him up. Don't dish it out if you can't take it, Mr. Weber. History teacher. You'd cast Fjkl's mom as a carpenter's wet dream. Flat as a board and in need of a good screw. You'd cast Fjkl, your mother. History teacher. Surprise Pikachu face. One of them sang A Whole New World, Aladdin, in German, but she replaced the lyrics with her describing her house. Never seen a room of kids try so hard not to laugh, but she don't the same thing to all 4 of her German classes. Subtaped a picture of my teacher and her fiancé to the chalkboard. She taped it with the fricking frame. We tried to explain that she didn't like her crap touched, but no, she needed to. She then got us to write something nice about the teacher on a sticky note and stuck it around the picture. It was done with good intentions, but what the frick. One of my classmates brought these 2 steel magnetic marbles to school and was playing with them in class. Our 8th grade English teacher confiscated them, slid them under her bra, fished them out and gave it back to him. Of course he didn't want them back after that. My teacher was this depressed 50-60-year-old man that weighed about 600 pounds and had a really bad eating problem. He was almost always eating. and he always tried to involve food in the lessons as much as possible. One day, the whole class had pizza. I think the school gave us the pizza for winning something, and one kid threw a whole slice of pizza in the trash after they were done eating. Rather than wasting the pizza, my teacher picks the slice out of the trash and starts eating it, and I'm pretty sure he called the kid out for throwing away a perfectly good slice of pizza too. The entire class were convinced the maths teacher ate a robin whole. One had flown through the window and he quickly ordered the whole class to leave the room and said something like, "I will deal with this." Seconds later he let us all back in and kinda licked his lips as if he'd just finished up a tasty treat. Of course the robin likely just flew away, but I prefer this version of events. Teachers live for when these moments happen and the inspiration strikes perfectly. My geography teacher once asked if anyone had something to eat, grabbed a sandwich of one of my friends, and just ate it while giving a lesson. More like the weirdest, most disturbing thing he said. I live in a place that tends to flood during the spring and he said he has had bad luck lately. So I asked him if his house got flooded and he looked me straight in the eye and said no. My sister was brutally murdered last summer. He then continued to teach the lesson as if nothing was said. Info. His sister, niece and brother-in-law were stabbed to death by the niece's ex-boyfriend. Having bad luck lately is a pretty understated way of bringing that up. Had a teacher who was rumored to be a huge pothead, went to Woodstock, etc. Anyways, at one point in class he told us to get started on an assignment, then walked to the back of the class where there was a closet with a water heater in it. For whatever reason, there was nothing in there but a water heater. He walks in, squeezes himself in next to it, and closes the door behind him. He stayed in there for about 20 minutes. Either that closet was a TARDIS or that dude was high off not knowing where the heck he was. I need to know what he was doing in there. Please investigate. My teacher had a rap battle with one of the students. The guy didn't have any lines, so the teacher won. My school is weird. On the first day of lecture in Psychology 101, the prof walked in late, grabbed a student's laptop, and left the lecture hall. He was gone for like 10 full minutes. There was a lesson in there somewhere. This had me trying to read the comment to the tune of the 12 Days of Christmas, and I gotta say, I wasn't disappointed. High school biology teacher brushed his teeth in class. He would also make tea using a beaker and hot plate from the classroom shelf. Absolute G. I had a middle school science teacher do the same thing. At the end of the year we had a cookout and he cooked hot dogs for us with a Bunsen burner. We had a language teacher in high school that was known as a perv but never any scandals. He had retired but came back to sub sometimes. The day of a pretty important test in English we walk into class and he was there. I sat in the back row of desks and my friend who sat beside me was absent. So he sat on top of my friend's desk and proceeded to talk to me nearly the entire class. I'd never had any interaction with him before. I was pretty timid and tried to do my test, but he wanted to chat. The next day my regular teacher found me in the hall. Without me saying anything said I could report to another classroom during that period and rewrite my test. So this wasn't a teacher, but it was the dude who gave people detentions and you'd serve them with him. I guess that every kid in school was on a good streak that day, so no one was in the room, it was just him, and I had to talk to him to reschedule a detention because I had a doctor's appointment the day it was scheduled. I had walked up to his door and his desk and PC monitor were visible through the glass in the door. I saw him watching AP on P-Hub. I sat there confused for a minute because he would walk around the school bragging about his wife. And then there he was. I took it to the principal, but they didn't do anything because I had no proof, and now the detention teacher is the principal. Oof. I was in school suspension and the administrator, teacher, is the type to get angry easily, and as I was sitting there mindlessly, he tries putting up a clock that fell, and for 10 minutes straight he kept failing and it kept falling, and every time it failed he would say under his breath, "Frick crap, etc." and it the funniest thing I have ever seen. Now that I think about it, it wasn't even weird, it was just funny. Oh well. At one point in my 7th grade, the AC, or at least, I think it's an AC, was really loud during our class, so our integrated science teacher went up to it and slapped it and subsequently turned off. After discussing for a bit he proceeded to turn on the AC, but didn't. He proceeds to apologize to the AC, before continuing our discussion. How British was he? In 4th grade, I realized my teacher graded my math homework incorrectly. They had marked answers wrong that were actually correct. I showed it to my parents and they confirmed it. I brought this to the attention of my teacher, and later that day she held my homework sheet up in front of the class and said, "This student originally got a B. Because he questioned his grade, he's now going to get a D." I was too young to process that kind of unfairness. He is the earth's scum. I'm sorry that happened to you. Not super weird, but this is the best place to share. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about the greatest teacher I've ever had and the greatest I will likely ever have again. For now, we'll just call him Mr. B. He was my 8th grade US history teacher. This guy could get away with doing the craziest and coolest crap during class. When we were learning about the Second Continental Congress, he assigned a founding father to each of the students, and we reenacted the whole thing in costume. In 2008, he was on the news for his model presidential election, something he still does to this day, albeit on a smaller scale. On our last productive day of school, he converted his room to an underground bar and taught us about the prohibition of alcohol while dressed as Al Capone and serving us beer. I think it was apple cider. He was always excited and unpredictable, and he never had an off day. I loved his class so much, and he's the main reason I'm so proud of my country. I wish he was my teacher. He sounds like a legend. My 58-year-old Algebra 1 teacher dressed up as the lead singer of Kiss, makeup, leather pants, etc. during our middle high school assembly and sang rock and roll all night while 3 guitar players and a drum player played the music. It was great. A teacher at my middle school was constantly harassed and bullied by 2 popular girls. He cried pretty much every class, but usually tried to hide it. Second to last week of school, he fully breaks down. He started crying openly, and runs out of class. He hasn't come back. Everyone felt bad for him. Moral of the story, kids can be evil. He probably had feminine hips. One of them fidgeted with her feet constantly. I know that sounds like a little thing, but it was legitimately distracting. She was always fricking with her shoe, like she seemed to have an obsessive thing going on. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.